I can still recall the sensation. It wasn't a huge, blatant clue or some shocking discovery, but rather a slow, creeping feeling that something was amiss. Lauren and I had spent years grinding together, building the business from scratch, late nights, endless conversations, everything. She was my partner through it all, and I thought we were completely in sync. But lately it felt as if she was focused on something else. Sure, she was still attending meetings and had that familiar enthusiasm when discussing numbers, but her eyes, her thoughts, seemed to drift elsewhere. When we finally signed that big contract, the one we'd chased for months, I expected it to feel like the pinnacle of our hard work. I wanted it to be our victory. We went out to celebrate, and at dinner, I couldn't ignore how Lauren's energy had shifted. She wasn't basking in the success itself, she was already talking about our next steps, about international expansion and the kind of clients who could open major doors. She kept saying things like, "We're nearly there, Zach. Soon we'll be at the top, where the real players are." There was an unfamiliar edge in her tone that hadn't been there before. Then we met Harry Weston, a self-made millionaire with that classic smug look, the kind that says he's seen it all. He wore his wealth like a fragrance, always hovering a little too close. At first I thought he was just another investor to support our next move. But from the moment Lauren shook his hand, I could tell she saw him differently. He wasn't just a source of funding to her, he represented a lifestyle, and she seemed instantly captivated by him. Harry spoke about his travels, the places he'd seen, and the exclusive circles he mingled in. I figured it was just showboating, but Lauren was all ears. I saw her laughing, her gaze fixed on him, her smile lingering in a way I hadn't seen in a long time. She even flicked her hair, a habit she had when she was interested, one she'd done with me back when we first started dating. It was subtle, but there it was on full display for Harry. I brushed it off then, telling myself it was just professional admiration. After all, we were looking to expand. But as days went on, it wasn't just about Harry. Lauren started pulling away from me in ways that felt like tiny cutting slights. She'd be out late, claiming to meet with potential investors or discuss strategies. I tried bringing it up, just to see where we stood, but each time I mentioned Harry, she'd dismiss it, insisting it was strictly business. Maybe it was, but there was a coldness in her eyes, like she was defending herself from an accusation I hadn't even made. I noticed changes at work too. Julia, my assistant, who'd been with us since the beginning, started picking up on Lauren's frequent private meetings, the ones that didn't seem to align with anything on the calendar. Julia's sharp, she's got a knack for noticing things, even if she doesn't spell them out directly. One day she dropped a hint, asking if I knew why Lauren was arranging so many off-the-record meetings. She wasn't prying, but I got what she was hinting at. I just wasn't ready to go there, not yet. Then came the distance at home. Lauren would return late, sometimes wearing a new perfume, one I'd never smelled on her before, and expensive to nothing like her usual brands. She'd mumble about high-profile clients and needing to look the part, but I was starting to feel like she was dressing up for someone else. Our conversations grew shorter, colder. She'd brush by me, always just busy enough, always with a reason why she couldn't stay or talk. When I'd ask what was going on, she'd respond, "Zach, this business doesn't run on autopilot." I almost felt guilty, like I was the one being unreasonable. At one point, I took it to Robert, a friend I've known for years, someone who's been there even before Lauren. He listened quietly, as he always did, letting me lay everything out. Finally, he looked at me with a serious expression I won't forget. "Look, Zach," he said, "I'm not saying she's doing anything wrong, but just pay attention. People can get carried away with success, just don't let your guard down." He didn't need to spell it out, I understood his point, and so did he. Still, he had a valid perspective. Maybe Lauren was simply caught up in the excitement. Maybe she wasn't doing anything underhanded, but even after our talk, that feeling wouldn't go away. It was like an itch I couldn't scratch. Every time she left, every time she scheduled another meeting, it grew stronger. I began noticing small things, slight shifts in her body language. She'd glance at her phone a little too often, or she'd linger on certain names in conversation, mostly Harry's. She wasn't the Lauren I knew, she was becoming a stranger in our own home. I couldn't tell if it was all in my head or if something had genuinely changed, so there I was, stuck in limbo. Part of me wanted to confront her, grab her phone, check her messages, and get real answers. But another part of me, the side that had built this business and this life with her, kept telling me to hold off, to watch, to be smart. I wasn't ready to act just yet, but I knew something wasn't right. Once suspicion settles in, it's impossible to ignore. It felt like a dial turning up, amplifying everything Lauren did that seemed out of place. She'd started dressing up more, too much, if I'm honest. Lauren was already stunning, and I appreciated that she took care of herself, but suddenly she was buying all these high-end clothes and new perfumes, the kind I'd never seen her wear before. When I asked, she brushed it off, saying, "High-profile clients expect a certain look." Zach, the tone she used made it sound like she was explaining something obvious. It felt like I was the one missing something. She was staying late at work, saying she was held up by evening meetings, buried under reports, or preparing presentations for new clients. But now it was every night, and her excuses were starting to sound weak. Sometimes she'd be home by 10, other times it was after midnight. I wanted to believe her, I really did, but there was this nagging feeling I just couldn't shake. Part of me felt guilty for even having these thoughts, but it was hard to ignore, especially with how quickly her wardrobe was evolving and how frequently she'd leave the house with that new perfume lingering in the air. Then came the day Julia, my assistant, casually mentioned that Lauren had left her work laptop open. Julia didn't push it, was just a passing remark, like a bomb dropped without any follow-up. I hesitated, debating if I was crossing a line, but eventually curiosity got the better of me. When I opened the laptop, I found emails between her and Harry. They weren't explicitly incriminating, at least on the surface, but there were peculiar hints, small phrases that stood out, references to meetings outside of business hours, vague mentions of going to the usual spot. It was enough to make my blood boil, but not enough to confront her directly. A few days later, I couldn't hold back anymore. I had to see for myself if I was imagining things. I knew she had a meeting near one of our regular lunch spots, so I decided to stop by, acting as if I was just passing through. And there they were, Lauren and Harry, sitting together in a corner, looking far too comfortable. They were laughing, leaning close, and I saw that familiar flick of her hair, the same way she'd toss it back when she was interested. Lauren noticed me first, and her expression went through a range of emotions: surprise, guilt, and then something that looked almost like annoyance. She waved me over, forcing a smile, and introduced me to Harry, who wore a frustratingly calm expression. "Hey, Zach," she said, slipping into a polished professional tone. "Harry and I were just going over some client strategies." She put extra emphasis on client strategies, as if I'd somehow misunderstood. I went along with it, shook Harry's hand, and tried to act natural, but inside I was fuming. There was no reason for her to be that close to him. No business strategy required her to laugh that much at his lame jokes. I wanted to confront her right then, but I wasn't ready, not yet. I needed more than just a gut feeling and an awkward lunch encounter. After that, I knew I had to get more information. Lauren had a close friend, Sarah, someone she confided in about almost everything. I figured if anything was going on, Sarah would know, or at least notice if Lauren was acting unusually. So I reached out, casually, under the guise of checking in, dropping hints to see if Lauren seemed any different lately. Sarah hesitated, then gave me a look that made my stomach sink. "Well, Zach," she started, choosing her words carefully, "Lauren's been talking about wanting more out of life. She feels like she's missing something, like she needs to experience real life, whatever that means." She paused, her voice softening. "And she's mentioned the people she's been meeting, especially Harry. She says he understands her goals." That was it. Sarah didn't have to say it outright, but it was clear. Lauren saw Harry as more than just a business contact. I thanked Sarah, keeping my emotions in check, and went home that night with a storm brewing inside me. Suspecting was one thing, but now I had confirmation. Lauren was searching for a life I wasn't part of, a life Harry seemed all too willing to give her. That night, Lauren came home late again, visibly tense, slamming her bag on the counter and taking off her shoes with unnecessary force. She seemed ready for a fight, and sure enough, she didn't waste any time. "Do you even care about my career, Zach?" she snapped, barely looking at me. "I feel like you don't get what it takes for me to succeed. You just want to stay comfortable, but I need more." "More," I echoed, barely containing my anger. "What exactly do you need more of, Lauren? More meetings with Harry? More late nights?" She rolled her eyes like I was clueless. "Oh, don't start with that," she said, exasperated. "This is just business. Not everything is about you, Zach. Do you think I'm doing all this for fun?" I wanted to shout, to demand the truth, but I kept my voice steady. Are you sure it's only business? Because it doesn't look like that, Lauren. You're out late every night, buying expensive clothes and perfume you never used to care about. If it's not about you, then what is it? She laughed, but it was bitter, humorless. Unbelievable. You really think I'm that shallow? I'm doing this for us, Zach, for our future. Maybe if you actually supported me instead of making baseless accusations, you'd understand. Our argument intensified, words flying back and forth, until she finally stormed off to the bedroom, leaving me alone, simmering with anger. I could feel the wall between us, the one that had been building for weeks, maybe months. After that night, I knew I couldn't trust her words anymore. She had already told me everything I needed to know through her actions, her dismissive tone, and her unwillingness to consider that I might have a reason to worry. As I sat there, I felt like the fool, the guy who thought he was building a life and business with his wife, believing we'd be partners in everything. But now I could barely recognize her. And as much as I wanted to believe she was just caught up in the excitement of our success, deep down, I knew better. This wasn't about business. It was about her, about a desire that went beyond anything we had built together. I wasn't ready to walk away, not yet, but I wouldn't sit back and let her tear apart everything we'd created either. I don't know what made her leave her phone on the kitchen counter that night. Maybe she was getting careless, or maybe she thought I was too naive, too trusting, to ever check it. Either way, there it was, buzzing on the counter with that familiar sound signaling a new message. I'd heard similar excuses countless times before, but this time something inside me snapped. I had to know the truth. I picked up the phone and glanced at the screen. The message was from Harry. It was brief but direct, mentioning how much he'd enjoyed their last meetup at the hotel and how he was already looking forward to the next. My hand went cold here. It was the confirmation of everything I'd been suspecting but hoping wasn't true. Since she'd left her phone unlocked, I scrolled back through their messages, finding far more than I wanted to see. There were messages about meeting up, subtle hints about private dinners, and words I hadn't heard from her in ages. I wanted to confront her then and there, but I knew it wouldn't be enough. She'd find a way to explain it away, to brush it off as networking or some nonsense about essential client relations. No, I needed more, something undeniable, and I knew just the person to help. The next day, I pulled Julia aside. She had been my assistant since the beginning, and if there was anyone I could trust, it was her. I laid everything out, the late nights, the lunches with Harry, and the message I had found. She wasn't shocked. She'd already noticed changes in Lauren's behavior. Julia offered to keep a closer eye on things, subtly monitoring Lauren's work activities and checking her email when possible. She'd even noticed that Lauren had been receiving tickets to expensive events, tickets I hadn't known about. With Julia's help, I started to get a clearer picture of what was happening. Lauren was careful, but not as slick as she thought. Her private meetings were becoming a routine occurrence, and the tickets she was receiving were for high-end events. I hadn't heard of events that Harry seemed to attend as well. It began to feel like I was on the outside, watching her flaunt a life that had nothing to do with us, our goals, or our future. But that still wasn't enough. I needed solid proof, something that would give me the leverage to put an end to this entire act. That's when I reached out to a private investigator, someone Robert had mentioned once. He didn't ask many questions, just nodded and took the information I gave him. Over the next few weeks, he followed Lauren, tracking her to upscale restaurants, exclusive parties, and sure enough, hotel after hotel. Each time, Harry was there, laughing, leaning close, playing the role. When the photos came back, my stomach twisted. There she was, dressed to the nines, looking happier than I'd seen her in years, wrapped around a man who wasn't me. They weren't hiding it either. In some photos, they were holding hands, leaning close, sharing looks I hadn't seen on her face in far too long. Finally, I had enough. I couldn't just stand by and watch her live this double life, pretending to be the faithful wife. So that night, when she came through the door, I told her we needed to talk. She looked at me, her eyes narrowing slightly, as if she was trying to figure out how much I knew. "What's this about, Zach?" she asked, trying to sound casual, but I could see the tension in her jaw. "I know about you and Harry," I said, my voice steady but firm. I wasn't going to give her any space to dodge. "I know about the hotels, the meetings, the messages. I've seen the photos, Lauren, so don't even try lying." Her face paled, then turned red. She opened her mouth, likely to deny everything, but something in my expression must have told her it was pointless. She exhaled, crossing her arms and looking at me defiantly. "And so what if I did?" she said, her voice cold and dismissive. "Can you really blame me? I've been stuck in this small, predictable life for years, Zach. Do you think a few business deals and a cozy office were all I wanted?" Her words hit like a punch to the gut, but I kept my composure. I thought we were building something together, Lauren. I thought this was about us, not about some fantasy life with a guy who just happens to have a loaded bank account. She laughed bitterly, shaking her head. "You don't get it, do you? It's not just about money, it's about lifestyle, about being with people who understand ambition. Harry does. He's everything you're not connected, influential, able to offer a life beyond this small-time setup." I don't know what I expected her to say, but hearing her justify it all, hearing her disdain for everything we'd built together, for everything I thought we shared, set something off in me. I'd poured my life into this business, working myself to exhaustion, and now she was just moving on like it all meant nothing. I felt the anger inside solidify, turning cold and calculated. I wasn't going to let her walk away without facing consequences. Once she'd said her piece, she stormed out of the room, leaving me there with the full weight of her betrayal settling over me. I was done playing nice. If this was the life she wanted, if she was so willing to abandon everything we'd created, then she could have it, but it was going to cost her. The next day I went straight to Robert, told him everything, her affair with Harry, her disdain for the life we'd built, and my plan to make sure she didn't leave this unscathed. Robert was all in. He'd never liked Harry, and he was more than ready to help me tear down whatever future she thought she had lined up. We spent hours discussing strategies, working out the legal side, finding ways to remove her from the company, ensuring she'd leave with as little as possible. We met with a lawyer who knew how to navigate the system, and step by step, we started building a case that would lock down Lauren's assets, cutting her out of the company, out of our finances, out of everything she thought she could claim. I could feel the anger fueling me, giving me a strange kind of energy, a fire that kept me pushing forward. Now I had the evidence, I had allies, and soon I'd have a plan that would make Lauren regret every second she'd spent with Harry. There was no turning back now. I was ready to see her world fall apart, piece by piece, just as she'd done to mine. When Robert introduced me to Jeff Carter, I knew I was stepping into a new arena, one where Lauren wouldn't be able to manipulate her way out. Jeff was exactly who I needed, a lawyer who knew how to play the game without flinching, someone who could guard me against any angle Lauren might try to exploit. We sat in his office, and as I laid out the situation, Jeff listened intently, nodding along, his eyes sharpening with interest. As I finished laying everything out, Jeff leaned back, a slight smirk playing on his face. "Well, Zach," he said, "if you want to go after everything she's trying to take, we can make this airtight. I'll make sure she can't touch a cent of the company, and when you file for divorce, she'll walk away with as little as possible. But we need to handle this carefully." So we got to work. Following Jeff's guidance, I started moving assets around, shifting funds into separate accounts Lauren couldn't access. We created a series of shell companies, each one layered with legal protections that would be impossible to breach without my permission. Every step felt like adding another wall of defense, and each transfer strengthened the shield between me and any damage Lauren might attempt. One of the most crucial actions was transferring part of the company's ownership to my sister, Lily. Lily had her own successful career, far removed from our industry, and had no loyalty to Lauren. When I told her the whole story, she was furious and didn't hesitate to help. By giving her a share of the company, I ensured that even if Lauren tried to challenge me in court, she wouldn't be able to touch it. The company would be beyond her reach. While all of this was underway, something else began developing: my relationship with Eve. Eve had been friends with Lauren for years, but she wasn't blind. She could see what was going on and didn't feel an ounce of sympathy for her so-called friend. She'd always felt overshadowed by Lauren, and now, with Lauren having burned every bridge, Eve was more than willing to help. She became invaluable, giving me insights I never would have had. She knew the real Lauren, the person behind the facade, and each new piece of information she shared helped me see the extent of Lauren's betrayal. As our plan unfolded, Eve and I began spending more time together, and somehow our connection grew into something more. It wasn't planned, but it felt inevitable, like we were drawn together by everything Lauren had done. Eve wanted justice, and so did I, but with her it was more than that. She was loyal in a way Lauren never was. As the line between ally and something deeper began to blur, I realized how much it meant to have her by my side, And if I'm honest, seeing Lauren's former friend stand by me, ready to bring her down, was a kind of revenge in itself. The next significant step involved the investors. Together with Robert and Eve, I organized a meeting with our company's most influential backers. They were loyal but had noticed the unsettling shift caused by Lauren's relationship with Harry. We called them in, presenting it as a routine quarterly check-in, just a standard discussion about the company's future. But when they arrived, I laid out everything Lauren and Harry had been doing. I showed them documents, records of extravagant expenses, and tickets to events neither Robert nor I had approved. The investors sat there, stunned, as I went through every cent Lauren and Harry had used for their private escapades. I could see the disgust on their faces as they realized how far Lauren had gone. By the end of the meeting, any loyalty they'd had toward her was gone. They backed me completely, signing off on measures to secure my control of the company and ensuring that neither Lauren nor Harry would influence our direction again. With the company secured, my attention shifted to Harry. He had his hands in numerous ventures, always angling for the next big opportunity. He liked to act as if he was a major player, someone everyone wanted to work with. But after what he'd done, I was eager to watch his reputation crumble. I started contacting his business partners, quietly slipping them information about his behavior, how he'd misappropriated funds, manipulated resources for personal gain. The response was almost immediate. One by one, companies began pulling out of deals, distancing themselves from his brand. Word spread quickly that Harry was someone to avoid. I heard through the grapevine that he was desperately trying to salvage his reputation, scrambling to keep his clients on board. It was satisfying to know he would have to face the fallout from the empire he thought he'd built. Meanwhile, Lauren was oblivious to all of this. She still believed her affair was a private, personal matter, convinced I'd simply let her walk away without consequence. She had no idea I'd moved most of the company out of her reach, or that her closest friend had become my ally. She didn't see the walls closing in around her, nor did she grasp the damage happening behind the scenes. With each step of the plan, I felt the weight of her betrayal lifting, replaced by a sense of control and purpose. By the time we reached the final phase, I had everything I needed. The assets were secure, the investors were on my side, and Harry's reputation was in shambles. Lauren and Harry thought they were untouchable, that they could live out their fantasy without facing any consequences. But they'd miscalculated, blinded by their own arrogance. The big day finally arrived. Everything had been meticulously planned: the invitations, the agenda, the catering. It looked like a regular business meeting, perhaps a bit more formal, but nothing to raise suspicion. Both Lauren and Harry were there, unsuspecting, thinking they were about to showcase another new phase of the company's growth. I watched them laugh and chat with clients, completely unaware that this grand presentation was about to destroy everything they'd worked on behind my back. When everyone was seated, I took the stage. Familiar faces of our investors, partners, and clients looked back at me as I began with a practice speech about our company's values, about our commitment to growth with integrity and to building lasting relationships. But soon my tone shifted. I saw a few people exchange glances as my words grew sharper, becoming pointed. Unfortunately, integrity isn't something everyone in this room has upheld, I said, letting my gaze scan the crowd, feeling the tension rise. I could see confusion spreading, and Lauren was glancing around nervously, clearly wondering where this was heading. I let the pause linger before continuing. Recently, I've uncovered some disturbing truths, revelations about betrayal within our team. My eyes landed on Lauren, and I saw her face register a flicker of realization. Beside her, Harry shifted in his seat, his smug confidence beginning to drain away. I clicked a button on the remote, and a screen behind me illuminated, displaying financial statements and bank records. They highlighted the funds redirected from the company into so-called business expenses that were anything but. I watched their faces as shock and horror spread through the room, everyone absorbing the details: luxurious dinners, high-end events, and private hotel stays, all funded with our hard-earned money. I trusted these people, I continued, my voice calm but laced with anger. I believed in them as partners, as leaders in our organization. But it turns out I was wrong. These funds weren't used for company growth, they were squandered on personal indulgences by people who thought they were beyond accountability. I advanced to the next slide, revealing photos of Lauren and Harry at these events, holding hands, laughing together over dinner, cozying up at exclusive gatherings. Gasps echoed around the room, and I saw Lauren's face flush a deep red. Her eyes darted toward the exits, as if she wished she could vanish and make it all disappear. Harry struggled to maintain his composure, but the panic was visible. He abruptly stood up, stammering, This is all a misunderstanding, but the investors weren't buying it." One by one, they turned toward him with looks of disgust, some shaking their heads, others rising from their seats, betrayal etched on their faces. "A misunderstanding?" I asked, my voice carrying through the stunned silence. "No, this is a betrayal not only of our company but of every single person here who placed their trust in you." More damning evidence rolled across the screen, screenshots of messages exchanged between them, detailing plans and jokes about living the high life. I watched Lauren's expression crumble as each message appeared, her polished mask cracking with every line. The room erupted into chaos, people muttering, some getting up to leave, others glaring at Lauren and Harry. I saw Lauren glance desperately at Harry, but he wasn't looking at her. He stared straight ahead, his face an odd shade of white, his mouth clenched tight. He tried one last time to salvage the situation, standing up and saying, "Look, this has been blown out of proportion. We didn't do anything illegal, but no one was listening. Investors were filing out, shaking their heads in disappointment." I watched as Harry finally gave up, grabbed his coat, and made a direct line for the exit without even a glance at Lauren, abandoning her as soon as things went wrong, leaving her to face the wreckage alone. Lauren, still in shock, tried to save face, mumbling something about a miscommunication and work-related outings, but the crowd wasn't buying it. Her voice wavered and the helplessness in her eyes showed just how deeply this was sinking in. For the first time, she was confronting the full consequences of her actions, a harsh, very public unraveling. Once the room quieted down, I took the microphone one last time. Effective immediately, I announced, Lauren and Harry are no longer associated with this company. With the support of our legal team and the approval of our investors, they will be removed from any involvement in our operations. Robert stood beside me, his expression one of quiet satisfaction. We had made certain that Lauren wouldn't just lose her position here, she would be left with nothing. Everything she'd schemed for, all the plans she made with Harry, were in ruins. By the end of the meeting, Lauren was standing alone, her once confident, manipulative self completely dismantled. She looked around, desperate for support, but every friendly face had turned away. At that moment, she realized she had lost it all: her reputation, her career, the company, and any hope of salvaging the dream she'd abandoned before. I watched her walk out of the building, shoulders slumped, looking as defeated as she had made me feel in those agonizing months before. The weeks following that meeting were a whirlwind. With her public disgrace still fresh in everyone's minds, the next step was clear. I filed for divorce, and with Jeff's legal expertise, we made sure every detail was covered. All the preparations we'd made, assets transferred into my sister Lily's name, company funds moved to accounts Lauren couldn't touch, made it a clean, decisive process. She had no claim to anything we had built. I had safeguarded every last dollar. Lauren didn't contest it, not publicly at least. By the time the papers were signed, her life was already spiraling. Her affair with Harry had left her saddled with debts they'd racked up during their little fantasy, debts she had assumed she could cover by drawing from the company. But with everything locked down, those expenses were now solely her responsibility. Jeff handled every detail, ensuring that not a single asset slipped through, leaving her completely stranded. After the scandal, people in our social circle began distancing themselves from her. Sarah, once her closest friend, turned her back on Lauren after realizing just how deep the betrayal went. Former colleagues stopped answering her calls. She had become a liability, a mark of shame among those who had once respected her. On the other hand, Eve became a cornerstone in my life. After all the deceit and betrayal, her loyalty was a breath of fresh air. Our relationship evolved, growing into something solid and enduring. She stood by me not only as a romantic partner but as someone I could truly rely on, someone whose loyalty she had proven in ways I hadn't thought possible. She became involved in the business, offering advice, helping me with strategy, and eventually suggesting we invest in a new venture together. She had a sharp mind, and her ideas brought a renewed energy to my work. I had thought my drive was gone, but with support from Robert and a few loyal former partners, I launched a new venture. We focused on pioneering financial consulting, adapting to market shifts and targeting areas others had missed. The response was more than I had imagined. Clients who valued my principles and business insight were drawn to us, and within months we were building momentum beyond anything I'd anticipated. the best part. This time I didn't have to worry about hidden motives or trust issues. Meanwhile, Harry's fall from grace was swift and unforgiving. Word spread quickly about his involvement in the scandal and the unethical actions he'd taken to sustain the lifestyle he thought he deserved. As his partners and investors abandoned him, he fought to stay afloat. Forced to sell assets and liquidate his holdings, he eventually disappeared from the business world altogether. For a man who had based his life on reputation, losing his status was a harsher blow than losing money. Then there was Lauren. With her debts piling up and her reputation in shambles, she struggled to find stable ground. She had once been respected, seen as an influential figure in her field, but now she was left with little more than low-paying jobs that barely covered her expenses. The industry she once dominated now viewed her as a liability, and any dreams of rebuilding her career were crushed under the weight of her choices. She'd risked everything for a brief taste of luxury with Harry, and now she was paying the price, starting over from nothing. As we all had at the beginning, only this time, she had no allies. As for me, the future had never felt so open. I was free at last, released from the burden of lies and betrayal. My relationship with Eve blossomed in ways I hadn't expected. She wasn't just a partner, she was someone who genuinely had my back, someone I could rely on without a trace of doubt. Every day felt like a new beginning, a fresh chance to live without the shadows of the past. Reflecting on everything, I felt lighter, as if I'd shed years of burdens I hadn't realized I was carrying. The business was flourishing, my personal life was stable, and the scars from that ordeal had become a source of strength and clarity I hadn't known before. I had endured betrayal, heartbreak, and attempts to strip me of everything I'd worked for, yet I'd emerged on top, surrounded by people I could truly trust. Lauren's story, however, was different. She was left piecing together a life she'd broken, facing the reality that she had traded love and stability for a dream that turned out to be mere illusion. She had lost it all, and she would have to live with that truth, with the loneliness and regret that came with it. But I was finally looking forward, unburdened, my path clear, leaving the past exactly where it belonged behind me.